Short video explaining what is DCR, Dynamic Client Registration. So first of all, DCR is a OAuth client feature. So what is an OAuth client? OAuth client is an element requesting OAuth tokens. That's it. Okay, so a OAuth client needs a client ID and a client secret. With the client ID and the client secret, the client can request for a token. And a client can be mobile application, an AI application, could be a laptop application, could be an agent for MCP or an AI agent, could be a code. It's anything, okay? It's anything, but in the code, it requires a client ID and a client secret. And so far, the administrator of APM, Keycloak, IDP, they had to create the client manually, one by one. Every time a new client needs tokens, the administrator has to register manually in the UI automatically through script, whatever, from automation, the client. So the DCR will help to automate these client registration. So the administrator will not have to do anything anymore. The client will automatically call an API endpoint and will ask for registration and will get in the response a client ID and a client secret. So how it works? First of all, you have an agent. Let's say it's a new agent, it's a pod. The pod is booting. The pod doesn't have any client ID, any client secret, but it has keys, okay? And these keys will be used to ask for an IAT token, okay? So the client will call the DCR API endpoint and say, I need an IAT, okay? I need an IAT token, and it will get an IAT token against keys, okay? Then, when he has this IAT, he can register. He can register against the DCR and ask for a client ID and a client secret. So now, he is a real OAuth client because he has a client ID and a client secret. And he can now ask for access token, and with the access token, he can send requests to the resource server. Could be a BIG-IP, an Nginx, a Kong, whatever. Okay, it's an API gateway, and it will validate the token. Now let's see how to configure the BIG-IP. I will go very fast on it because it's traditional OAuth authorization server configuration. Okay, so first of all, go to the access, and in the federation, let's focus on the authorization server. This is where you configure the authorization server and the DCR. Before creating a profile, you have to create an IAT client. Okay, you remember step number one, the new client needs an IAT token. So to do so, you have to create a client. Okay, this client is dedicated for DCR, for registration. So I created one, I give a name, MCP server demo, check the box client credential. Okay, this is mandatory, but you can also select code if you want. Redirect URI, and then you select the secret for authentication type. Okay, I don't use certificate, I will use a secret. So I will pass the secret through either header or body. Done. Okay, you can add a scope if you want. I recommend to add a scope. So only the scope DCR for this client will be allowed. And when you validate it, you're gonna have a client ID and a client secret. And those keys, client ID and client secret, are used only for DCR, for client registration. Now, let's configure your OAuth profile. You go to OAuth profile, you create a new profile, and on the profile, you can find now a new menu, Dynamic Client Registration Configuration. By default, it's disabled. When you enable it, you have your client application, the IAT client application, the one I just created, the grant type, okay, hello, authorization, implicit, whatever. So we're gonna use client credential mainly, and I will pass the credential in the header or the body. Okay, so this is more useful. Okay, if you use Postman or if you use a script, if you use Python, Node, is better. And the scope allow, okay, to be delivered by these AS. The rest here is traditional authorization server configuration. Okay, but just one tip: opaque token must be enabled. The IAT is an opaque token. but the JOIT token, the one delivered at the end, is a JOIT. Okay, so you must enable both opaque token and JOIT token. OpenID Connect if you want an ID token, and the rest is as usual, your issuer, your keys, okay, or your key is one key or several keys. And if you want, you can add an audience, you can add claims, whatever you want. And at the end, now you can see a new endpoint called register. This is where the brand new client will ask for an IIT token. And after he got the IIT and after he got the client ID and the client secret, he will ask for a token. That's it. Okay, so it's very simple. And on the VP itself, on the VP, you need a logon page. If you read the documentation, it's specified that the logon page is mandatory, even if the logon page is never presented, because it's a script. Okay, in my demo, it will be a script. Okay, it will be a Postman, a script, an AI agent. So we'll do a different client. And the authorization is just auto authorization, empty, without any specific settings. That's it. Now, let's register our first client. In order to understand the steps, let's do it with a Postman. Okay, so I have a Postman, and on my Postman, I have the different steps. If you remember my presentation, the different steps to register a new client. So the first step is to get an IIT token. And to get an IIT token, I will go to the token endpoint with the IIT client ID and IIT client secret, the one I got from the BIG-IP configuration. So if I send it, now I have an access token, an opaque token, and I will use this opaque token to register my client. So at the moment, I don't have any client ID, client secret to request token. So it's time to create my client. So I go to the register endpoint. I define a client name, the grant type I want to use to request tokens, the redirect URI, for instance, Postman here, and what kind of response type I expect, okay, a token or a code. And now if I send it, I have a client ID and a client secret. So from now, I can request a token. And this is my next one. So from now, it's a traditional OAuth OpenID Connect step, okay? It's /token with my previous client ID. If I go back to my client ID here, you can see it's 0092. And now to get my ticket is 0092. Perfect. So now I send to the token and I have a JOIT token. And with my JOIT token now, I can request resources. Okay, so I can go to my MCP server, for instance, and on my MCP server, I would just initiate a connection, notify my connection to get MCP session ID. It's here, perfect. So now I have a connection with the MCP server, okay, and I can make a request. For instance, my MCP server is doing maths is doing an addition 9 plus 7. If I send my request, I can see the response is 16. Okay, so it works. Okay, so the BIG-IP validated the JOIT token presented in the request. It's here, this one. Okay, the JOIT token is this one. It's the token I got from this request. Done, easy. Registration, get a token, send your request to the resource server. Now, let's have a look on the BIG-IP side. On the BIG-IP side now, I have a new client. As you can see, the type is dynamic. Okay, type dynamic with a name and a random string, a client ID, the scope, and so on. So if I click on it, I have my client ID, all the settings I set, client secret expire at. So you can see it's few days. Okay, and you can go to the secret, which is here. Now let's see in a real world, in a real customer environment, how it works. Okay, so I just presented with Postman. With Postman, it's just a way to understand the different calls, but in a real world, it would be an agent. It could be a pod, a Docker, a script. So now I have here a node server. Okay, I have a node which will do exactly the same, and the goal is to register this client, get a client ID, get a client secret, get an access token, and send a request to the MCP server to do an addition of 7 and 30. So let's do it. So as you can see, I have a lot of steps. First of all, the first one is to discover the endpoint. Okay, give me your register endpoint /register if you remember. Then obtain an IIT token. Okay, so got it. He has an IIT token here. then register the client with this IIT token, the next step, okay? So you go to the /register, you can see here, /register, and you get a client ID and a client secret. Then request for a token, request an access token, got it, and then with the access token, now we can discuss and exchange with the MCP server. Initialization, success, notification to get a session ID, and then the request, okay, the call is done in order to do an addition, and the result is 37, okay? It was 30 plus 7. So as you can see here, this is how it works. I can do another one. If I do another one, it will be a new, okay? Or you can reuse it depending how you configure it. And if I want, I can change, and instead of 30, I can put 5. Now I have 12. This is how it works. So if I go to the BIG-IP, here on my client, you can see that I have 2 new client register with a client ID and a client secret. So far we have seen the Postman to understand the step. We have seen the AI agent, okay, with that we run manually. So now let's do it in the real world, okay? How it works in the real world when people or script automation start agent on the fly as needed. So as you can see, I created the dashboard. On the dashboard now, I will simulate agent. I will run the agent, okay? When I need one, I click new agent. So what I'm gonna do, let's do it. I click new agent, agent created, and now I can select my agent and say, okay, please do an addition from 9 to 7. Okay, done. 16, okay. I need another agent. Okay, let's do another agent. Second agent created. Okay, I can select my second agent. I can say multiply and run. So every time I start a new agent, there is a new registration done on the BIG-IP, okay, and I can use my third agent to do something else. This is the real world, okay. So if I go to the BIG-IP, now if I refresh, I will have more and more and more agent, okay, because I request to have a new agent. So it's a new agent running, making a job, and I can also delete it, okay. I can destroy it if I want. So this is how it works in the real world, and I created just this dashboard in order to create on the fly new agent and use the MCP tool to make a job, okay. So it's mathematical job, so it will be add, multiply, or so now if I want to add on 90 plus 7 on the number 3, is making a call to the BIG-IP, and I have the result on this agent, okay, because it has a client ID and a client secret. Very simple.